Let's start perhaps with a secret. Since childhood, we all think that Moscow State University, MSU, is the first university in Russia, but that's not entirely true. MSU is the oldest and of course the most important university, but not quite the first. By the early 18th century, the country had two higher educational institutions, the Kiev Mohyla Academy and the Slavic Greek Latin Academy in Moscow. However, neither had scientific books. You could study languages and theology there, but not physics or chemistry. At that time, it was obvious to many that the country needed educated people, and theological universities wouldn't get you far. Peter the Great understood this well. He launched an education reform. Thus, specialized technical schools appeared first, and then the Academy of Sciences, a place where, according to the plan, all the science in the country was to be concentrated. Almost from its foundation, the Academy of Sciences had a university, but it was more of a university in name than in essence. Many great academicians tried to organize education at the academy, make it orderly, and admit more students. But any changes were very difficult due to the already established order and constant struggle of academic parties. And then finally, a hero appeared, who managed to change everything. Mikhail Lomonosov took up the cause. Thanks to his talents in science and his ability to persuade not only with facts but also with high poetry, he gained special influence at the court. Then he began to desperately promote the idea of opening an advanced university in Moscow. This was especially facilitated by one of Elizabeth Petrovna's favorites, Ivan Shuvalov. He actively supported the sciences and arts, including many of Lomonosov's initiatives. It was Shuvalov who, in 1755, obtained the Empress's decree on the founding of the Imperial Moscow University. For convenience, we will call it in the modern manner from now on. He then took the position of its first head. Now, some detractors like to say that Lomonosov, when creating the MSU project, simply copied the models of the best foreign universities. But this statement is completely untrue. European universities, which were born in the late Middle Ages, originated from monastic schools. Much like in antiquity, a student would first study subjects such as grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. After completing these foundational studies, the student could then choose to enter one of the three specialized faculties: theology, medicine, or law. But in the 18th century, sciences separated from theology, and the structure of the classical university became completely outdated. Lomonosov, who studied in Germany on an exchange program, saw this firsthand. Therefore, when creating MSU, he understood how to improve this system. The first Russian university did not have a theology faculty from the beginning. In Lomonosov's project, its place was taken by the familiar philosophy faculty. Interestingly, at the time of the university's establishment, there were simply no scholars in Russia who could fill all the professorial positions. But Lomonosov still persuaded Shuvalov to immediately secure funding for all the planned teachers. He suggested that the money that would come in before the necessary scholars were found be spent on books and scientific instruments. Despite the many prejudices that were still strong in 18th century Russian society, the university's doors were initially open to all classes except for serfs. But even this was not a very strict condition. In the project confirmed by the Empress, it was specifically stated that landlords could free talented serfs to allow them to receive an education. It is from Moscow University that generations of educated commoners and scholars of various classes grew. Now watch the hands. On January 12, 1755, Elizabeth Petrovna signed the decree on the creation of the university. On April 26th, the grand opening of MSU took place in the building of the main pharmacy, which was restored in 3.5 months. The library, accessible to Muscovites, immediately began to operate, and the teachers started giving public lectures. In May, 30 seminarians from various monasteries and 6 students from the Slavic Greek Latin Academy were enrolled in the university, and on June 1st, 1755, classes already began at the university. We hope we haven't tired you with the number of dates, but this is very important for understanding how quickly everything was managed. MSU existed within the walls of the main pharmacy for almost 30 years. When it became clear that the university needed to expand, Empress Catherine II, who was a strong advocate for enlightenment, allocated 125,000 rubles from her own pocket for the construction of a new building on Mokovaya Street. In 1786, the construction of the main building began, and in 1793, the building was ceremoniously opened. The main thing that grew out of MSU in the 18th century was medicine. Among the first students admitted to Moscow University was Semyon Zibelin, who became one of the founders of the Great Russian Medical School. He was an amazing lecturer. He was the first to introduce the demonstration of experiments. Within a few generations, Zibelin's system would nurture Nikolai Pirogov. Yes, he was also a student at Moscow University. The name Pirogov is well known, but only medical graduates know the essence of his discoveries. Meanwhile, his contribution to modern surgery is enormous. Pirogov founded several new sciences that made surgery more gentle. For example, topographic anatomy. As Pirogov explained, a surgeon should engage in anatomy not like an anatomist. When thinking about the structure of the human body, a surgeon cannot for a moment lose sight of what an anatomist does not even think about: the landmarks that will guide him during surgery. Pirogov's descriptions of operations were accompanied by incredibly precise drawings. In Russia, the first operation under anesthesia was performed by Pirogov's colleague Fyodor Inozemtsev, head of the Department of Surgery at Moscow University. Pirogov performed a similar operation a week later. In 1847, 690 operations under anesthesia were performed in 30 cities in Russia. 300 of them were Pirogov's, but his main achievement is the invention of field surgery. Unlike general surgery, military field surgery develops methods for treating the wounded in combat conditions, focusing not only on saving lives, but also on evacuation from the battlefield. Among other notable achievements, Pirogov was the first person in the history of medicine to use a plaster cast. So the next time you break your arm and need a cast, don't forget to thank this pioneering Moscow University graduate. The beginning of Alexander I's reign was marked by a rapid development of education in Russia. Following the model of Moscow University, Kharkov, Kazan, and Dorpat universities were opened. At Moscow University, the number of students increased fivefold. But the vigorous start of the century was overshadowed by the War of 1812. The university, of course, survived. All professors and students were evacuated to Nizhny Novgorod. The human resources were preserved, but the library, archive, museum, and almost all scientific equipment belonging to Moscow University were lost in the fire. At that time, many prominent people began donating money, books, ancient manuscripts, natural science collections, and instruments to the university. The rapid development of the university resumed with the accession of Alexander II. Thanks to his reforms, the number of academic disciplines and the number of teachers increased, and about 1,500 students were studying at the university's 4 faculties, most of whom were commoners. For that time, this was an astonishing phenomenon. People from various social classes aspired to study at Moscow University, and for a young scientist to work there, it was not necessary to wait for a professorial position to become vacant. One could become an assistant and then at their own pace climb the career ladder to the rank of professor. But one of our graduates went even further. He opened his own university, albeit unintentionally. Nikolai Sklifosovsky, an outstanding scientist and doctor who radically reduced mortality in surgeries thanks to antiseptic methods, entered Moscow University at the age of 19, where he lived and studied on a small charitable scholarship. At the age of 46, he took the position of Dean of the Medical Faculty and immediately began its modernization. Thanks to his persistence, a clinical campus was built on the Maiden Field, consisting of many of the most modern medical centers at that time. In these centers, students and professors combined scientific, educational, and therapeutic work. And already in Soviet times, this entire territory was separated from Moscow University and turned into the well-known First Medical Institute. In the 19th century, Moscow University became a center of attraction for the entire Russian intelligentsia, not just scientific. Von Vizin, Karamzin, Tyuchov, Griboidov, Fet, Turgenev, Chekhov, Kandinsky. This is just a small list of the names of students who graduated from Moscow University. The main event of the early 20th century was the Russian Revolution of 1905. At that time, student youth around the world had a radical mindset. As Statham said, "Those who were not revolutionaries in their youth have no soul." And as is well known, Russians are known to have very broad souls. Moscow University was often forced to interrupt classes due to frequent student unrest. Many students were detained during clashes with the police. Nevertheless, the university continued to operate and stood firmly on its feet. The real upheavals occurred in a relatively calm and very successful time for the country. At a time of rapid growth in education, science, and industry, the country could not find a balance between the desire to maintain stability and development. In the early days of January 1911, the Minister of Public Education, Lev Kassov, issued a series of official orders aimed at restricting student freedoms. These orders included banning non-academic student meetings and tightening supervision over students. Mass student unrest began. The police entered the academic buildings to suppress the disturbances. In protest against the actions of the government and law enforcement agencies, almost the entire administration decided to resign, followed by dozens of professors and over 100 teachers and staff members. This was one of the most significant crises in the history of Moscow University, but many great professors stayed. The university survived and continued its mission of science and education. The new rector, Matvey Lyubavsky, managed to save the university, prevent further clashes with the authorities, and preserve academic freedoms. Neither after the February nor the October Revolution was there a mass exodus of teachers and students. Even the rector, an absolute monarchist by conviction, stayed at the university until the end and reinstated colleagues who had been dismissed in 1911. However, the university never saw a peaceful life. In the year 1920, the Soviet government seriously began the process of reforming higher education in order to bring it more firmly under state control. The new authorities highly valued natural and technical specialties, but they had their own, often dogmatic views on the humanities. This led to the destruction and complete restructuring of the humanities. Of course, the name Imperial Moscow University was not suitable for the Bolsheviks either. As a result, the inappropriate part of the name was dropped, and the now well-known abbreviation MGU appeared. By the way, throughout the 20th century, the university had many names. Moscow State University, named after Pokrovsky, Moscow State University awarded the Order of Lenin, the Order of the October Revolution, and the Order of the Red Banner of Labor, Lomonosov Moscow State University, and simply Moscow University. Once, it even served as the first Moscow University. And where did the number in the name come from, you ask? Which university was second, third, and so on in the list? Well, we can certainly answer about the second MSU. The Soviet authorities named the Higher Women's Courses, which were opened in 1872 by Professor Vladimir Guerrier of Moscow University. This was the first higher education institution open to women, closely affiliated with MSU from the very beginning. By the way, half a century after the founding of the Higher Women's Courses, the first and second MSU partially merged, and girls infiltrated our university. Although the early years of Soviet power were a time of various hardships and resource shortages, the university's intensive growth continued. New scientific institutes and faculties appeared, and the number of students grew the fastest. At the height of the Civil War, the Soviet-Russian government issued a decree stating that admission to all universities should be open to anyone aged 16 and over who wanted to study, regardless of their citizenship and gender, and without the need for exams, certificates, or diplomas. If by early 1917 about 7,000 students were studying at MSU, by January 1st, 1922, there were almost 23,000, but not everything was so rosy. In the late 1920s, the university found itself on the verge of complete and utter destruction. In Red Student Journal, an article by Moscow University's rector, Ivan Udaltsev, was published under the terrifying title 175-Year-Old Elder. In it, Udaltsev argued that the university's structure, due to its cumbersomeness, hinders the development of science. We consider it necessary to divide the university into its fully independent constituent parts. It's time for the old university to retire on its 175th anniversary. Due to the reorganization, several strong independent institutes separated from the university, contributing to the development of science in the USSR. However, only one working faculty remained, preparing the proletariat for higher education from 7 small natural science departments. In general, many of the universities we are now familiar with originated from the separation from MSU. First, Sechenov Medical University, Pirogov Russian National Research Medical University, MGIMO, MIPT. Each of these universities started as a faculty of Moscow University. By the way, even the Higher School of Economics would not have appeared without MSU. The higher school was founded by graduates of Moscow University, Yevgeny Yasin and Yaroslav Kuzminov. Fortunately, they did not have time to completely liquidate the university in the 1930s. Among the Soviet managers, there were those who understood the strength and power of MSU's scientific and educational traditions, which could not be lost. Vasily Kasatkin, who became rector immediately after Udaltsev was removed from office, began to revive fundamental science at MSU, laying the foundation for the modern structure of the university. His reforms played a huge role in Soviet science. After all, the atomic and rocket projects would simply not have been possible without the existence of classical faculties. For example, the Faculty of Physics and Technology was established at MSU specifically for the nuclear project, later becoming part of EMIPT, along with the Institute of Nuclear Physics. The renowned faculties of Mechanics and Mathematics, Chemistry, Physics and Biology, also founded by Kasatkin, provided the scientific foundation for the applied and technical calculations needed to tackle the most groundbreaking challenges. But the happiest period for the university in Soviet times was during the rectorship of Ivan Petrovsky. There was no war, and the government not only did not put obstacles in the way, but also supported the development of science and education with all its might. By the way, it was during this period that the university was gifted the legendary complex of buildings on the Lenin Hills. In short, nothing else prevented the students and professors of Moscow University from standing at the forefront of Russian science. The university participated in the launch of the first near-Earth satellites, Soviet rockets towards the moon, and manned space flights. Geologists, geographers, and soil scientists went on expeditions to Siberia and the Far East. There they developed plans for the construction of hydroelectric power plants, explored oil and gas fields, and conducted advanced research. In general, the science of the 20th century was largely created by the graduates and scientists of Moscow University. Out of 18 Russian and Soviet Nobel laureates, 11 are somehow connected with MSU. Tamm, Frank, Prokhorov, Ginzburg, Abrikosov, Landau, Kapitsa, Semenov, Gorbachev, Sakharov, and even Pasternak. Each of them made a huge contribution to the development of global science or culture. Describing the achievements of each outstanding university scientist could take forever. Just listing the names would take hundreds of minutes of our time. Therefore, with your permission, we will limit ourselves to just a couple of outstanding figures, and we won't forget about the Nobel laureates. One of the greatest mathematicians of the 20th century, Andrei Kolmogorov, entered MSU in 1920. In the first month, he passed the first-year exams and started receiving a scholarship for the second year. 16 kilograms of bread and 1 kilogram of butter per year. By 1933, he became a professor, a star of the mechanics and mathematics department, largely defining the modern look of mathematical science. Without his discoveries, many contemporary studies would simply be impossible. Another MSU graduate is Vladimir Demikov. He is considered the founder of modern transplantology worldwide. While still a third-year student at the biology faculty, he constructed and implanted the world's first artificial heart in a dog, which supported its life for several hours. After graduation, Demikov continued his research. In 1946, he was the first to transplant a donor heart into a dog, and soon he was able to completely replace the heart-lung complex of the experimental animal, which became an absolute sensation for the entire scientific world. The best scientists and surgeons from around the world lined up to attend his operations. Although Demikov's activities were perceived ambiguously within the country during Soviet times, we can now confidently say that his discoveries saved the lives of a huge number of people. Andrei Sakharov entered the physics faculty of MSU in 1938. In 1941, he wanted to volunteer for a military school, but was not accepted due to health reasons. He graduated from MSU in 1942 and immediately got involved in solving practical problems of the atomic project under the leadership of Igor Tamm. And what did he actually do? Right, the world's first hydrogen bomb. The test took place in August 1953. As a physicist, Sakharov was interested in the development of the latest technological advancements. Plus, he believed that weapons could serve as a means of ensuring security and stability. But with the nuclear tests, he realized the immense destruction and dangers that the use of such weapons entailed, and he began advocating for international disarmament and the banning of nuclear tests. Not immediately, gradually. For example, even before the 60s, he proposed placing nuclear charges along the US coast, each with about 100 megatons, if necessary. Yes, press the button. But from 1967, he became one of the leaders of the human rights movement in the Soviet Union. And at 75, he received the Nobel Peace Prize. By the way, since 1961, nuclear tests in the Soviet Union moved underground, partly due to Sakharov's efforts. Another well-known Nobel laureate and MSU graduate is Mikhail Gorbachev. The university played a special role in his life. It was during his studies at MSU that he met Raisa Maximovna, a student of the philosophy faculty. Their first meeting took place at a dance evening in the student club. They had their wedding in one of the university cafeterias and started living together, moving to a dormitory on the Vorobiovi Hills. After graduating from the law faculty with honors, Gorbachev began to rapidly climb the career ladder, eventually reaching the top position of General Secretary of the CPSU Central Committee. The main thing associated with Mikhail Sergeyevich's name is perestroika and glasnost. One can have different opinions about his actions as head of state, but it is hard to argue that his large-scale reforms had a huge impact on the history of our country. In 1990, Mikhail Gorbachev was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his contribution to the peaceful process in relations between the Soviet Union and Western countries.